So, welcome to the permissions video. We'll just take a brief look here at the different permissions you can assign to a form. If you're just fiddling around with the webmaster account, you can generally ignore this step because the webmaster account, anything that's a webmaster, any account that is a webmaster account essentially has an override in place. But for setting this up for real use with real users, you will need to set up permissions for different groups that you've created, like the 3 groups that we set up earlier. So if we are at the form, either here or on the main page, main formulize admin page, you just find the form and click configure. That will take us to the different tabs for the form. And what we want to do is just change some of the permissions. So you can pick one or more groups depending on what you want to set here. We'll just pick all 3 to keep this simple. And then you can say show permissions for these groups, and the page will reload, and it will show us here in a moment all the options for different groups. So here we are. Those are the groups that we've selected, and they're all shown here, 3 different groups. Some options to be aware of. You can save lists of groups. So we don't have any group lists right now, but you can, if you decided to, could click save these groups as a list, and then we would be able to take them, we'd be able to come back to them when we needed them. You can, and if you did save them as a group, then they'd show up here. So also, set the same checkboxes for all the groups. If you pick this as yes, then when you click any one of these boxes, it's going to set it or remove it on this group and on this group as well. So that's an easy way of setting the same permission across many groups all at the same time. So you don't have to go click, 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 and repeat that for say 10 or 20 different groups. Some systems can get quite complex in their setup. In our case, we're not going to do that. We'll set up just these 3 separately, but it's a handy option to have. So supervisors, they will be able to view the forms. Basic permission for accessing the form. Any group that's going to interact with the form will require that permission. They can certainly create entries, they can update entries they've made, update entries by other people, and they can delete entries as well. Visibility. Now, there are several different options for visibility in formulize. One is private elements. Now, we don't have any private elements at the moment in the form, but we might later in future videos, or you might create some. So supervisors presumably are the kind of people who would see the private information, but not other users. People who can view their own entries, that is always on. That people can always see their own information. Then there's a few different scoping choices. So viewing entries by all other users in all groups. That is sort of a global visibility choice. That is probably appropriate for supervisors, usually used by people in a senior position. The alternative is usually this one. View entries by other users from these groups only. Now there's a list here of groups, and the default is all the groups that the user is a member of. Oh, that is cut off, but what that is intending to say is all the users the group is a member of that can interact with the form. So if you check that box there, the view entries by other users from these groups, and you leave it on the default, then what that means is the user is basically able to see entries by anyone else who's in the same group as them. That's the basic idea. So that's useful for, if people are supposed to see entries within a department, but not other departments, or within whatever groupings they belong to, then you would check that box and just leave this alone. You can, however, basically set other options for how people view things. You could check this, and you could say supervisors can specifically see everything that the rangers can fill in. And if you had some configuration like this, you turned off all entries in all groups, but you set it up this way, then supervisors would be able to see entries by rangers, but not by other people. So there's obviously many different permutations that you can set up here in formulize, and I obviously can't go through each of them, but what we'll do in this case is we'll just leave supervisors able to view everybody, and we'll just leave the rest alone for now for them. There's also conditions that you can set. You could say only view entries that meet certain conditions. So maybe you've got a question in your form that says this citing has been approved by a supervisor, and maybe there's members of the public or something who are going to interact with this entry, and you only want those people to see entries where the approved question has been checked off. So you could set various things here. Pick the question equals yes or something, and then those users would only see entries that met that particular condition. So you can get quite specific. It's not just that people can see entries that belong to a group or a part of a group, but maybe only specific kinds of entries based on the answers to certain questions in the form. There's also publishing of saved views, something we'll look at in a future video, but basically you can save a particular view or perspective on the data, and then some groups can have options to publish those to other people. So the publishing options are group-based. You can publish to people in their own in your own group, or you can publish to people in any group. Normally, if you pick that one, you wouldn't need to pick that one. And then there's updating saved views that other people have published and deleting saved views other people have published. So maybe you can only publish to other people, but you don't have rights to delete views that you've sent to them. You can think of these as reports, so to speak. It's not it's a fairly simple version of reporting, but it does let you publish information back and forth to other users, and this gives you control over when and how that is done. There's also some advanced options, importing data from spreadsheets, creating notifications that get sent to other users. Normally people can create notifications, but only for themselves by default, and creating notifications for others is part of this is what this permission here lets you do. Create entries on behalf of other users. That's a proxy. There's such a thing as a proxy user, one term for it, where basically imagine the administrator or the supervisor had to fill in information that someone else had sent them by fax or they had received in some other way. So it's really an entry that belongs to that other person, but the supervisor is filling it in on their behalf. So that's if that's a situation that applies to this group, then you could check off that permission. Change the owner or creator of an existing entry. That's another option that the person who originally created the entry is often very important in formulize for determining what groups the entry belongs to. And changing the owner or creator is obviously an advanced option that will change all of those group associations. So only certain people can do that. And alter the form's configuration settings. That lets people interact with the form here on the admin side. If they don't have, the group does not have that permission checked, then they cannot edit the form. We'll let the supervisors do that. And deleting the form. We'll maybe restrict that to just administrators or webmasters. So it's totally up to you, obviously, how you set up these various permissions. Needless to say, there's many combinations and effects that they can have. The ones that people interact with mostly are the basic ones about creating, updating, and deleting entries, and then the viewing permissions are obviously really important. What data are different people allowed to see, and depending on the groupings you have in your application, you'll set those up in various different ways. So for volunteers, they will create entries. They can update their own entries, but maybe maybe that's it. And they can see their own entries, but probably nobody else's. And then for the rangers, they can see their own, create their own. Maybe they can update other people's, but that's maybe all. Maybe we'll reserve deleting for the supervisors. Visibility-wise, maybe we'll let the rangers view entries by other rangers as well. That's in fact, maybe we'll let them see rangers and volunteers. That might, but not supervisors. I don't know. It depends on, we have an imagined workflow here, so maybe everybody should really view everyone's. It just depends on, what the real life, what's the real world process that your application is supposed to represent. That's the question, and there can be many ways that plays out, and there are many choices here to help represent all those options. So let's maybe leave it like this for now, just so that there's some different things that we can demonstrate, and we will leave the publishing alone for rangers as well. So there's a quick run through of the permissions and some explanations of what they do. In summary, supervisors can do pretty much everything. They can see all entries by everybody. Volunteers can simply create entries and update the entries they've made, but that's it. And rangers can create entries and update them. They can also update entries that other people have made, but their visibility or their access to entries is restricted to only entries from volunteers and rangers. So not just the rangers group. We could just say this, all the groups the user is a member of, so that would mean rangers. But in this case, we'll just expand it to these two groups just to make it a little more interesting. Last point on that is if a user is a member of more than one group, just turn that off. If a user is a member of more than one group that does have permission to the form, and you do select this top option, all the groups the user is a member of, then it effectively gives them group visibility over all of those groups. So if they are a member of, say, 3 groups that all have permission to formulize and permission to interact with the form, then just that single top option will dynamically match their own permissions. It is based on the user's own group permissions. So if you have a bunch of different classes of users that have, you can get quite complex here, because you could have groups that where people are mixing and matching different combinations of groups. Some users in these 3, some users in 2 of these and 1 of the other ones. Formulize will pick up on what is the group membership of that particular user and give them visibility to that collection of groups. So it's not just, say, this one group that we're setting the permission for right now. It's potentially representing multiple groups that the user might be a member of. And that's the last thing I'll try to explain about that. If you fiddle around with these options and look at some of the, start looking at entries and logging in as different users, then you'll quickly get a sense, I think, of what's possible. So we'll save these, and then that will give us everything we need to move on to looking at the form. If you don't set permissions, then the form will not show up in the menu for users. Even for the webmaster, actually. That is one other thing that's important about permissions. The permissions do basically activate the form in the menu. If there's no permissions set, then the system will think that the form shouldn't be shown. So now that we've done that, next we will move along to filling in the form and seeing how different users interact with it in different ways.